like to thank the Saga Skirmish Facebook group for providing the pictures of sweet Vikings for this video. If you're interested in Saga, consider joining the group. There's over 5,000 members, posting pictures of their models, terrain, sharing strategies and tactics. It's a good group of guys. You definitely want to check it out after finishing this video. Hello friends, welcome to Saga THORSDAY. I am your host Raj. As always, I'm here with Mike Mihalis. How's it going, my man?
Great, Raj. How are you?
Excellent to chat with you. So we've connected a few times here. You're a Adepticon regular. Had some late night chats for sure around the Saga hearth at Adepticon there over some spotted cows and such. So you were helping us out today with the Vikings battle board and faction review. So kind of overdue, I would say, but we're getting to it. Definitely one of the more popular factions here. So I'm assuming you've played a bunch of Vikings.
I played Vikings since the game came out. Stuck with them all through first edition when they weren't the toughest faction, but. Excited for them in second edition. They're where they should be, I think, now. So
okay, yeah, definitely a lot of good abilities, and I think you are definitely in good company because always at Adepticon and other events, even towards the end of first edition, there was always just a disproportionate number of Viking players out there slogging through it. So
it's like everybody's first faction, So
I know. They're definitely, what's not to like about them? I definitely need to get some Viking models. It's been way overdue. Hopefully get a little extra motivation here. I want to do some Eastern style Vikings so I can count them as some Yams, some Pagan Rus perhaps, but I like the Vikings. It's fun using the runic dice. So you're a long-time player. You know a lot about these guys, so I think we should just jump right into it.
Sure.
And the unit selection here is pretty easy, I would say. We've got your Warlord, Hearthguard, Warriors, all standard guys, just your hand weapon shield fellas. Now, the Vikings do get the fun unit. Everybody learns about these pretty quickly when they're playing Saga, the Berserkers.
Yep.
So they drop their armor to 3. And their aggression shoots up to a whopping 4. So they're kicking out 16 attack dice on the charge. If you can get all 4 of those little buggers in. And we all know that they can easily supplement those dice and do nasty things on top of it.
Get them to 32 dice, ideally. So.
Absolutely. So do you... This is one thing that I never considered. Do you always take Berserkers? I was watching...
The answer would be, in 6-point games, I pretty much always take Berserkers. I know some Viking players move away from them because they're fragile, but I think they present such a threat and create a concern. They create a radius that people want to stay out of. So even though they may not pay for themselves, if they end up taking out a 1-point unit, so be it, we'll swap. But I just think the concern they create is worth it. So 6-point game, I take them. 4-point game, when we do like team games and stuff, maybe not then because they vanish so quick and you lose that Saga die and that kind of thing. But I like them. I like them for sure.
Yeah, I think they're definitely a good threat, and they're one of those units that the longer you can keep them out of the fray, the more they're going to be sweating, waiting for that hammer to charge. So I think that's kind of the some veteran play there of holding those guys back rather than having that be your first unit to go out, which is kind of like a newbie thing to do as much damage. But there are some times that it might be worth it if there's a 8-pack of Hearthguard out there and you could do a straight-up trade with some nice abilities. That may very well be worth it. You got your levies here as well. Looks like you can take bows and javelins. So have you been experimenting with some levy for your Vikings? I know there is maybe a little trick with the javelins. Have you tried those guys?
Yeah, I've even first edition, I was fond of Levy with bows, especially against certain opponents. If I fight against a mounted faction, again, it's that sort of threat radius that levy creates that makes some mounted units nervous. If I can park levy with bows in a wood, if I can deploy my terrain, ideally it creates a bit of a zone of control for them. Yeah, and the javelins, that's a new thing in second edition, and there are some Saga abilities that they go very, very well with, and maybe we get into that when we actually talk about the abilities. That'll come to light. But yeah, the javelin levy are certainly worth considering.
Okay.
Yep.
When you use them, do you use just a big 12 pack, or do you split them up?
Yeah, I've just put them in the unit of 12. I mean, they're tough to activate, right? You got to use an uncommon to activate them. There's uncommons for some of the best abilities on the board. So that's always been the tough thing with Viking Levy. I mean, even, you get those turns where you just can't do anything with them because you can't spare the die. So, yeah, I've always, whether bows or javelins, I keep them in 12s. And as far as other units go, I'm fond of hearthguard. I know some Viking players move away from hearthguard and go with lots and lots of warriors. I like that 8 unit of hearthguard, and so I'll use those pretty often. So it'll be berserkers, 2 points of hearthguard, and then either 2 or 3 points of warriors, depending on whether I take the levy or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, sounds like a nice balanced force.
Yep. Yeah, I don't think you can really go wrong with Vikings as far as, you take berserkers, you don't take hearthguard, you take warriors. Really, I think you can make it work with anything for sure.
Mm-hmm. Vikings, no, berserkers. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think you can pretty much just get away with about anything. I think you do need some hearthguard, or I guess berserkers could count for those guys just to keep the little insurance for the warlord, but any kind of mix there is probably gonna work out well for you. So if we want to jump over to the board right away, I see up top looks pretty standard now. They brought most of these in line in the second edition, so I don't see anything jumping out at me as far as the basic Saga abilities. So I'm going to jump down to Njord there. Uses a rare dice. This is an activation ability. And it's remove a fatigue from each unit within medium of your warlord. And I know this was in the FAQ, but they clarified that it's all units, friends and enemies. Which that is
sad about that.
That is how it reads. But you're kind of like, there aren't really a lot of Saga abilities like that affect both units. So you could definitely question the wording on it. So, before, now in the prior edition, it was just your units essentially, correct? So, just a little bit here. But for a rare dice, definitely your warlord counts as a unit within medium of himself. So, it's going to be him, and then even if you just catch one other unit, I think that's a good use of a single Saga die generally. Having the enemy nearby, not so good. It's going to limit the effectiveness, especially in the later game turns. I can't really think of any. What's the Aetius and Arthur faction where you can more fatigue is better for them? I guess you could suck a fatigue off those.
Yep.
I can't think of any situation where removing a fatigue from the enemy would be beneficial. Yeah.
I use this ability to do big advances, right? So say you want to get 3-4 units up there, with the warlord in their face, and you might be moving up on units that don't even have any fatigue, right? So then they get no benefit from it that way. But it's a great way to make a double move with multiple units, get rid of the fatigue. If we're moving to objectives, I mean, second edition, we've all been playing, just the base scenario for so long, but now having played some of the Book of Battles stuff, you see, I mean, it changes the game totally again, right? And you're going for objectives, and this can help you move quickly, get up there, seize objectives. And like you said, if you remove 2 fatigues, I think it's worth it. I always sort of equate one fatigue is about equal to one Saga die in the currency of Saga, right? So, yeah, if I can get 2 off, it's good. It's a great, it's a great way to help save your warlord, so he can take some more hits too. So, and it's one of 3 fatigue removal abilities. So, it ties into the whole board, right? As far as getting fatigue free and using that as your advantage. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely plays into the speed and aggression elements of the Viking Warband. And great points about the scenarios. And whatever kind of scenario you make up, it has to be movement based. So a board with the ability to remove the fatigue for the multiple activations is going to have a leg up compared to those boards that don't have something like that. Yep. And you can definitely combo it, do some rest activations, pop Njord, get 2 fatigue off a swath of guys if you're going to pay a couple dice to do it. So, yeah, very useful ability for sure. No matter which way you slice it, just kind of brought down a little notch in the 2nd edition. So maybe something I don't know if I would purposely put units within medium range of Viking units, but perhaps you could consider doing a double activation or something, to catch them out. Yeah. Okay.
Even team games, we play team games every year to Adepticon, right?
Absolutely.
There's always a debate about that, but in the case of this, if it affects your enemy, it certainly affects your allies as well.
It's in the fact, bro.
Yep.
And do you have the fact up for the Viking? Do you know anything else? I guess you'll have to let me know.
Yeah, the only thing that got in the fact for Vikings was Njord and Odin. And when we get to Odin, we can talk about that. But if that sounds good. So.
Okay, that sounds good. So I think that wraps it up for Njord there. Do you want to pop down to Frigg there?
Yeah, sure.
Everybody's favorite.
Yeah, my number 1 Saga ability. So an uncommon or a rare, or I like to use the names of the dice, Berkanen or Sawillo for Frigg. And it's a melee ability. Remove a fatigue from your unit or gain 3 attack dice. So this is probably the number 1 used ability on the board for me. There's no question. It's awesome. It's, Vikings are about aggressively attacking, and if you're going to make, in a lot of cases, you're going to make 2 moves to make that attack. You can make that movement activation. Then the charge activation, you go in with the fatigue. If you have Frigg loaded up, the first thing you do is take that fatigue off, and so then you're fighting with no fatigue, so you don't have that disadvantage. The nice thing they did with it is add the ability or gain 3 attack dice, and that's pretty good, a Saga die for 3 attack dice. And then that gets you in the situation where you can have Frigg on there in a sort of a defensive situation. If you're anticipating being attacked and you've got Frigg loaded up, it doesn't become useless, because the problem, it's not really a problem with Frigg, but if you're defending and you have Frigg loaded up and you have a fatigue on, and your opponent charges you, they get to play their Saga abilities first, of course, and they should be smart and spend your fatigue first, right, before you have a chance.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, that's always kind of another newbie thing you see with players is they rush the berserkers out there, and then on your turn when you go in, they think they can use the Frigg, but I'm sorry, I already burned the fatigue, my friend.
Right.
But like you said, now at least you'll get those 3 attack dice, and uncommon for 3 attack dice. That's pretty darn good.
Oh yeah. Yeah, just a comment in general. It doesn't seem like much. Remove a fatigue from a unit, but the way I view the Vikings is, you got basically the board does 2 things. It removes fatigue and it adds attack dice or hits. That's really all the board does until you get into Ragnarok and stuff like that. So you really need to be looking for small advantages that you can exploit. You're always going to take losses playing as the Vikings, but the idea is, as long as you inflict more losses on the other side, you're doing well. And Frigg ties into that. A 1 fatigue advantage can swing a whole combat. So, I just think it's a good example of a simple but important Viking ability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to point out it's even more important just because your warband is entirely on foot. So if you're going up against those mounted factions, multiple activations are often the only way to get at them. And sometimes there'd be a triple activation where that would be crippling to some warbands. But if you're just going with one fatigue and you got a slew of attack abilities to soup yourself up, I think the Vikings are one of the best foot factions to be able to go after those guys.
Yeah, you mentioned berserkers. I mean, given the opportunity, I'll do a 2-move followed by a charge berserker attack if there's a juicy target. I mean, it's I know, like you said, it's kind of a newbie thing, open with sending the berserkers out. But if the target's there and you can generate the dice, use Frigg to take off one of the fatigues. So you go in with one fatigue. You can do well with that, though.
You can do well, yeah.
If your opponent can get to armor 6, be very, very careful. No matter how many dice you roll, it's hard with armor 6, though there is an ability further on in the battle that helps with that.
I've thought I've been pretty safe with armor 6 in some games here, and I've been bitten. So
as a Viking player, I've experienced it for the other side, where I go in 32 dice and I need 6s to hit, and you end up with 1 or 2 casualties.
Okay, so we can look at those combinations there. That'll get us through. But Frigg, definitely useful ability, and you're probably gonna use it 5 times in a 5-turn game, most likely. So, okay, cool. I'm gonna pop down to Heimdall. This is a dice. What do you call this one?
Fehu.
Fehu. Okay, that is what I call it.
Fehu means wealth or cattle. Berkanen is, I think, just a birch tree, and Sowillo is sun or victory.
Okay.
And, that was from an interview long ago with the designer. He mentioned that. So.
Okay, I guess it depends. Whatever book that I learned it from, the B symbol is a Beork, and S is a Saga laws. But then there's Germanic runes versus the Viking. I'm not totally familiar with that. But anyways, moving down to Heimdall. This is a melee ability, and it's going to reduce your unit's armor by 1 to gain 5 attack dice. So 5 attack dice is pretty good.
Yeah, this went from the worst ability in Saga on the first edition board.
Yeah, you never saw it used.
No, it was actually worse than not playing the ability. We're just better off not playing it, than you to. But now this is really good. Heimdall, armor 1, not so, dropping armor by 1, not so great, but 5 attack dice is really nice. And you have to look at it in the context of the rest of the Viking battle board, where there's other abilities that are like that you either lower armor or in the case of Ragnarok, say, or in the case of Valhalla, you take casualties to get more hits. Heimdall, potentially you take more hits, potentially to do 5 more attacks. So I think it's a good, when you're planning your board for the turn, I think Valhalla is a great ability. I mean, Valhalla is so important in the Viking battle board, but there's going to be situations where you're better off using Heimdall rather than taking 2 guys off with Valhalla to get 6 more attack dice. Lowering the armor by 1 and getting 5 attack dice, maybe you only lose 1 extra model in that case. So if you can do the math, the fuzzy math in your head before you make that decision, Heimdall can come out pretty well. It's also great for Levy. So this is what ties into the Levy. You can't use Valhalla on Levy, so this is the best way to get Levy more attacks. So if you have 12 Levy with 4 attacks, you can play Heimdall, lower their already lousy armor by 1. So they're Levy, right? You're not worried about them dying. So, but you'll bring them up to 8 attack dice. So, tied in some other abilities that we'll get into, you can do some damage with Javelin Levy, in particular is what we're talking about.
With the +1 to hit, just rolling 8 attack dice with a +1 to hit.
Yep.
It's nothing to sneeze at. Yeah, so great ability if you nice and themey, representing the ferocity of what we like to think of the Vikings were all about.
Sure.
So useful if you don't care if your unit's going to live. So you mentioned the Levy. That was the one unit that jumped out to me. The second one would be the Berserkers, naturally.
Yep. They're going to die anyway.
Yeah.
You already sent 3 of them to Valhalla when you charged them in, right, to get 12 more dice. So why not lower that one last guy's armor by 1 to get 5 more? So
just to cap out there at the 32. Although I don't know, those little Berserkers seem to somehow, despite being armor 2, there's so many situations where 1 or 2 of them makes it through, and then you're like, oh gosh. But great ability. And then I think another thing I would use it for is when the enemy doesn't have a lot of attacks coming back, like you're going after their Levy, for example, or it's kind of like a nice, Saga is so dicey. You should kill this unit, but this is like, okay, if I get 5 extra attack dice, then I'm definitely going to kill like the 4 Levy or something, where if you just have 8 warriors roll in, you might not actually flub a few rolls, they make a couple saves, but throw Heimdall on top of it, add some insurance there to, I'm picturing just wiping out units that aren't really going to be swinging back at you necessarily, like archers or Levy. So
units that are going to close ranks on you, and reduce their attack dice anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So quite a few boards might be interested in doing that. So,
I like it on the Warlord too. If he's got bodyguards near him, so that I'm not terribly worried about taking a few hits. To add 5 attacks to that Warlord, go to 13. Pretty nice.
Yeah, and he doesn't care about taking those wounds as much because he takes that fatigue, but he can shed it a lot easier than a lot of other factions can do that. So very cool ability, very, very handy. So I'm going to let you pop down to Odin there.
Sure. Odin is 2 commons, 2 Fehus. It is a shooting reaction. The shooting unit takes as much fatigue as necessary for it to become exhausted. So there is something in the FAQ on this, and they're just clarifying that even though it's a shooting reaction, you don't play it right when they declare their shooting. You play it during the Saga ability phases of that shooting. So you can't use it to, say your crossbowmen are going to shoot at me. I say, well, I'm going to play Odin fatigue you and then take 2 fatigue off to cancel your activation. You can't do that with it. It's the fatigue comes later. So the crossbowmen are going to shoot, but as soon as you play the ability during the Saga abilities phase, we can put the fatigue on them at that point.
Okay, so the fatigue pops up. Then it's like their turn to play something, and then it comes back to you, and then they've got a bucket load of fatigue. So
it really makes a unit so that they are only going to shoot once. And
yes, if you leave the fatigue on them, just let them do whatever they're going to do once, and then they're done, and you might have a nice unit to attack next turn. But if you really need to, you could peel those dice to keep you alive in a strategic situation or something like that.
I don't. It's a good ability. I don't use it all the time against shooty armies. It's kind of expensive. 2 Fehus is a lot for Vikings. I mean, for Vikings, you want to be moving, you want to be attacking, so it's hard to justify that when you can put a Fehu on Heimdall and Valhalla and execute another attack. I mean, or move twice and go attack the shooters rather than even letting them shoot at you, right? To begin. But where it is really effective is if you're dealing with large units of shooters that are going to want to shoot multiple times. I mean, somebody rolls in with mounted hearthguard or something like that. And then Odin shuts them down, and it's awesome. But I fight Normans regularly, and the Norman shooting is the archers shoot once, maybe twice. The crossbowmen now with the new rule really only shoot once per turn in most cases. So Odin's not really worth it. I don't use it in those cases. I'm usually just got better things to do with those 2 common dice. But it really does great against, like I said, the the big shooting units, especially hearthguard. So
yeah, absolutely. It's a corner case ability. When it comes into play, it's really useful. It's so powerful against those hearthguard units. It's probably just having those dice on there is going to change their battle plan because they're not going to want to even shoot with those guys. So yeah, very, very cool ability. Gives them a little something to weather the missiles, but I don't think that they're really particularly vulnerable to shooting, except for our berserkers. But if you've been listening to our advice, they're nestled safely in the back, waiting their chance to counterattack. Hopefully, but
I like to leave them chilling out in the wood, ideally somewhere near the middle of the table, and then throw 3 dice down to get them going, moving, and charging.
Yeah. I hear you. Okay, I'm gonna pop up to Asgard. This is a activation reaction ability, and this is going to trigger after a unit has been activated to charge, but before the charge is resolved, remove a fatigue from one of your units. So I guess one thing that I've seen a couple new players get confused on is they try to use it on their turn when they are charging to remove fatigue. So this is actually a defensive ability that you use when the enemy charges you. And you can remove a fatigue from one of your units. The wording there is very clear. It does not have to be the unit that is actually being charged. So you can kind of take a look at the tactical situation there and pull a fatigue off a different unit if it suits you. So just that, I think, in it itself makes this a pretty handy ability. Uses it uncommon again, so competing with Frigg here, but there's going to be a couple more uncommons we're going to need. So may not be your first choice for your uncommon dice, but if you got a turn where you roll 4 or 5 of the buggers, definitely a useful ability here. Anything you'd like to add to that, Mike?
Yeah. I think we always talk about Vikings in the context of attacking, right? Moving in and making the attack, but there is a lot of situations. I mean, going back to the scenario situation where you want to get somewhere and park, right? And then that puts you in sort of a defensive posture, and that's actually a good place to be because Saga favors the defender, really. I mean, it takes a die to attack. It doesn't take any dice to defend. You can just have dice on your board, right?
Good point. Yeah.
So Asgard ties into that. So you're doing that double move to hold that objective. Well, somebody's going to charge you to push you off of it. You play Asgard, take that fatigue off. It's great if you extend your warlord out there for some attacks. You're worried about him getting counterattacked, take that fatigue off. A unit that is going to survive combat, say that 8 Hearthguard unit, you send him in to fight. You don't want to leave him laying out there with 1 fatigue on, so you have Asgard. But like you said, it is an uncommon. There's other abilities competing for that uncommon. So, this is an ability I'll maybe see a couple times in a game, sometimes never in a whole game. And once you start to lose dice, especially, it's probably not the highest priority ability to put something on. But combine Njord, Frigg, Asgard. I mean, if you really want to keep the fatigue off, or you're fighting Anglo-Danes or something like that, it's great ability.
Yeah, I like it's nice and themey kind of too, because it encourages you to kind of push a little harder maybe than you would normally, and you've got the Asgard in your back pocket there to kind of rest up before the counterattack comes in. So very, very cool ability. Well, I'm going to pop down to Thor here. I have to say, the thorn in my side in the new edition here has been Thor.
Yeah.
I didn't think Allure could be surpassed in my dislike, but this Thor ability has found a place just above it, and of course you can use both, which is the worst. So this one is a melee ability. Using the uncommon dice, inflict an extra automatic hit for each 6 or more you rolled on your attack dice. So on the surface, pretty simple here. Roll lots of 6s. You're going to do good, but when you think about it, sometimes someone sets up their abilities and such to only be hit on a 6, it's basically like doubling your attack power. Every 6 you roll is like having an additional 6 attack dice. I don't know how you want to think about it. Combos with the javelins because it's a 6 or more. So we've got our unsuspecting Levy unit hanging out nearby, and counterattacks on your turn. You pop Heimdall to get 8 attacks. You're getting +1 to hit on those dice, and then a third of those are going to be essentially double damage. So, just
it's a great ability. As long as you can roll 6s, it's a great ability. Like you said, it deals with the 6 armor situation, and that has always been a problem with the Vikings. Is if you can get in there, if somehow the opponent can get to 6 armor, it doesn't matter how many attacks you have, it can really just go poorly for you.
Yeah, if you just had 32 attack dice, you might get 5 hits. I mean, statistically, it's going to be 5 or 6. So you're going to do a few wounds.
Saves, it's not gonna do it. But Thor changes that, because now your 6s get doubled. So if you get those 5 hits, it turns into 10 hits. Now the Javelin Levy thing, you go in with the Javelin Levy with Heimdall, Thor, and Allure, it ends up being, on average, around 10 hits on Hearthguard. So it's a surprise. First time it happens to anybody, for sure. But it's a heck of a lot of dice, right? You're talking 4 dice to pull it off, plus the charge. So 5 dice, but to get 10 hits on Hearthguard with Levy, it's worth it. So, but there is another way, so you read Thor and you're like, okay, 6s, well, how do I get +1 on my dice? And you mentioned Javelin Levy, so that's 1. Okay. There is a way to get Dane axes in the Viking army with one of the legendary units. So, and if anybody's crazy enough to let you take the magic sword in the back of the book and put that on your warlord, and then you play Thor, you're going to have a good game. So if you're a Viking player, just kind of, quietly offer to your opponent, hey, you want to try out those cool magic artifacts in the back of the book? And put the sword on your warlord and send him out with Thor, and he'll be a wrecking machine. So,
absolutely, very cool. And you are right. It's one of those abilities that you have to roll those dice. So it's an ability where sometimes you won't actually get any benefit from. Gaining attack dice, obviously you can miss on all those attack dice, but it's more obvious when Thor kind of fizzles and backfires. So let's get into Allure then, because we've mentioned it a couple times already. Might as well just get it out of the way.
Yeah, so Allure is a common and an uncommon together. It's a melee ability, and you may re-roll all your attack dice which do not score a hit. So rerolls are always an awesome ability, of course. I think this ability is great for, I mentioned that 8th Hearthguard unit. We always think of Vikings as attrition, right? Send in the warriors, most of the warriors die, and, they maybe take out some of the unit or hopefully all of the unit. But you can kind of have those 8 Hearthguard that you want to keep alive, acting as more of sort of an elite fighting force. And I like putting Allure on them. They roll a lot of dice, and being able to re-roll those misses because this is an ability that increases their hits without reducing their armor or me having to sacrifice models or any of that, right? It just it simply increases hits. So it's great. It is expensive. It's hard to roll it, especially towards the end of the game, right? It's hard to justify it. It competes with Thor. It competes with Heimdall. It competes with Frigg. It's but it's great. Obviously, it's great, and it's really great with Thor. Because then, if you don't roll 6s, well, you hope you whiff some, so you can re-roll them to get a chance at more 6s, and get even more hits. So, if you can play. On your warlord, if you go in with your warlord and play Allure and Thor, you're really going to do some damage. So, Yeah, in my opinion, great ability. Great ability. Combines with all the other abilities well. So.
Yeah, it really, I think, shines when it is combined with those other abilities because it's not actually giving you any more attack dice. So that's why, running it with the hearthguard is a good combo because you start with a bucket load of dice with those guys so you can get the most of it. And like you said, towards the end of the game when your units are smaller, is it important to reroll like 6 attack dice or 7, or do you just go for extra 5 attack dice with Heimdall, or extra 3 or something like that, so you get more bang for your buck? So this ability is great. There still aren't a lot of reroll abilities, and definitely not attack dice in Saga. So anything that negates a run of bad luck is a great ability to have, and there just isn't a lot of stuff like that out there. So yeah, it's when you deliver that hammer blow, you can absolutely make sure it's gonna have you're gonna do some damage. Where sometimes you can other factions you can roll 20 dice. If you end up needing 4s or something, you could come out with like 4 hits out of 20 or something like that. Not with Allure, like there's a level of certainty there with having that ability, and I guess combining it with some of these other abilities to just soup it up even more. So great ability. Let's pop up to Loki here, and I have to read it. I don't know if this one gets used a lot. It's a melee ability, uses a common until the end of the melee. Gain 2 attack dice each time the enemy unit triggers a Saga ability or uses one of your fatigues. So if you think they're going to use a lot of abilities on you, you're going to get a little more bang for your buck. I'm thinking of a case where it's going to be particularly useful. I guess it seems to me like more cream on top after you spend all your dice and you're going to be going into a combat. This is a way to get even more attack dice. Are there specific instances where you've designed a plan to use this?
I like this ability a lot. I think it's pretty unique in terms of Saga abilities. I don't know that there's any other abilities that like trigger multiple times, right, during exchange of Saga abilities. So I think that's kind of cool. If it goes off twice, I think it's worth the die, right? If it gets you 4 extra dice for your common, that's a good, to me that's a good trade. So I like it against opponents that are in a defensive posture, and they're going to pop a lot of abilities. So you play a Scott player, and he's going to go 1, 2, 3 these abilities. Well, every time he uses an ability, he gets you 2 dice. So you may end up with 6 extra dice. It's pretty much guaranteed, against if he's set up for that defensive play. If you're going in with fatigue as well, it also can be useful because it'll make opponent think twice. Well, I could take off one of your fatigues, but if I do, you get 2 extra attack dice. If I take off another, you get 2 more attack dice. So it puts some decision making on the opponent, plays a little, gives them an opportunity to maybe make a mistake in some way. I think, like you said, it's a little situational. Situations like I mentioned, like if you have fatigue, well, your priority is to use Frigg to get rid of it when you attack. But maybe you don't have the Perconon, so you put this on Loki, and at least maybe you'll get some attack dice. You put a common on Loki. It's definitely, you have to consider that it is way better on attack than it is on defense, because it's not going to start triggering until you play it. And if they go first and play a Saga ability or remove one of your fatigues, you get nothing for that. You need to play Loki first and then have them play this. And it also doesn't work well with Frigg, because you got to decide, do I use Frigg first or do I use Loki first? Because if I don't use Frigg first, well, they'll spend my fatigue. If I don't use Loki first, then I miss a opportunity for Loki to trigger. So I think it's a cool ability. Again, maybe see it a couple 3 times in a game, maybe never even sometimes. So certainly not a core ability, but I think nice to have available.
Yeah, you raised some good points, definitely. I guess when I was reading it, I was thinking more like a like a defensive only type thing. But yeah, definitely use them to charge when you're going in against the Scots or something like that. It kind of helps you overcome those defensive abilities and make them consider whether they want to use them or not. Adds a little extra something in the mix there. So yeah, that makes sense. You wanna do Valhalla?
Sure.
Everybody's favorite.
Yes, my favorite. So Valhalla, melee ability. You can use any die on this, though there is a benefit to use a rare. So remove 1 to 3 warrior or hearthguard figures from your unit. Gain 3 attack dice per figure removed, 4 if you used a rare. So Valhalla to me is the defining ability of the Vikings, right? It's all about taking losses, not caring, and inflicting more and more casualties. I use Valhalla all the time, particularly on warriors. It gets a little painful to use it on Hearthguard, but I do. Yeah, but you know, I've done it. There's situations you have to do it. Not painful to use it on berserkers at all because you know they're going to die anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So you send those 4 berserkers in. Pretty much anybody they fight is going to take them out. So you should be playing Valhalla and taking off 3 of those berserkers to gain either 9 or 12 extra attack dice. A good key thing to remember with this is those models that you remove from Valhalla do not count towards determining who won the combat because they were taken off during the Saga step.
Oh, okay.
Saga step, not during the combat resolution step. So they don't count towards wins or losses. So you can, Valhalla 3 models and you're left with, a couple of guys, but because maybe you took out more of theirs, you can actually win the combat still. So that's something to consider. I also like it as a sort of a defensive ability. It's because it's a deterrent. I didn't mention earlier, but if I know I'm fighting somebody who's not going to shoot me up a lot, and I can kind of count on going in with full units when I go into combat, and I say I do 3 points of warriors, I'll field them in a group of 9, another group of 9, and a group of 6. And the reason to do that is because it optimizes things for Valhalla. If you left them at 8, 8, and 8, they are suboptimal for Valhalla because if I take off 2 guys with Valhalla, I'm not getting the most out of Valhalla because that will add 6 attack dice when I could add 9 attack dice by taking 3 off. But if I only have 8 warriors, I throw away a precious attack die, and for no good use. But if I have 9 warriors, I go in, I Valhalla, take off 3 models, I get to 18 attack dice. So I max out on attack dice with Valhalla. And I've seen situations where I'll put 9 warriors out there, I'll have Valhalla on the board, and somebody else decide to charge them with their 8 mounted Hearthguard. And I play Valhalla.
Sounds like something I've done.
I take off 3 models, and all of a sudden I've got 18 attack dice, and they may wipe out my unit, but I'm probably gonna have a good shot, especially if I have other abilities going, at taking out more than 4 Hearthguard and making it a good exchange. So it kind of goes back to that idea of, hey, I may lose all my warriors, but I killed 6 Hearthguard and they only have 2 left in their 8 Hearthguard unit. That's a win, right? And
absolutely.
I do that enough times, and suddenly, they have nothing left worth fighting with. So another way I like to use Valhalla, to go back to it defensively, the way the flow of combat works is you can close ranks, right? And get the defensive bonus of close ranks, but that does not affect your maximum dice that you can roll later. So if you started with 9 warriors and you close ranks, if you read how the steps work, and if you read in the FAQ, it's actually the number of dice that you can max out at is based on how many you had at the end of step 1. And step 1's deciding to close ranks, but you don't actually reduce the dice by half till the end of step 2. So you can sort of reduce your dice, close ranks, and then use a bunch of abilities to pile back up onto attack dice. and potentially survive. Kind of a fringe thing to do, but if you're trying to hold an objective again, something like that, you're trying to keep them from, getting through to, your baggage and escort type scenarios and stuff like that. It might be worth considering. I found close ranks to be quite effective. Makes a big difference in combat. So
blocks half the hits coming in.
Yep. So I love Valhalla. I'm always surprised when I hear or see Viking players who really shy away from using it, but to me it's the defining ability of the Vikings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think this is definitely the reason why people favored warriors previously. Yep. And probably, if you want to win all your games, maybe lean that way still. But
sure.
One thing I'm looking here, so it looks to me like this is probably one of the best places to park a rare dice that you get. Nord is a great ability. You don't necessarily need the rares, except for Ragnarok, which is two rares.
Right.
You don't always have two, but frequently you find one. So do you use the rare?
Yeah, if I've got the extra rare, I mean, truly the most likely place for a rare to go is in the activation pool.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, just give me more dice, more abilities.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the most likely place. But if there's that extra rare and Njord isn't going to do anything for me, or if it's going to help my opponent by taking off their fatigue, then I'll put it in Valhalla because it means 3 extra dice on the, if you take off 3 models. So, I think it's worth it. Yep.
Yeah. Very cool. And then I just wanted to clarify for the newbies out there. So you calculated your dice at the beginning of the combat. So removing these warriors halfway through doesn't actually affect the number of dice that you'll be rolling because they've already generated their attacks.
Yeah.
That's kind of a common newbie thing. There's going to be a lot of noobs playing this board. So I just want to clarify for those folks.
Yeah, because you see the situation where maybe one berserker got taken out by crossbows, right? So you end up sending in 3 berserkers, and you play Valhalla, and you remove all 3 berserkers.
Yeah. Like, wait, what?
Yeah, well, guess what? We still keep fighting. There's nothing left there, but we still keep fighting. We roll all the dice for those berserkers. So, yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Signature Viking ability right behind Allure and Thor. So I'm going to round it out with Ragnarok, everybody's favorite ability to shout from the rooftop. So takes your two rare dice. It's an orders ability. Interesting. I don't think there's any other orders abilities for our Vikings. Nope, I do not see that. Until the end of the turn, the melee armor of all units is reduced by 1. All your charges are free activations. And Valhalla becomes a basic Saga ability. So that means you can Valhalla as many times as you like. Well, I guess as many dice as you have stacked on there.
Right.
You can pop it. So, a little bit of a beef from last time. First edition, I think it was just reduce the armor of everybody by 1, and that was it. So it kind of affected both of you equally, but if you're rolling bucket loads of attack dice compared to your opponent, it should work out for you. The interesting bit where you get the utility, I think, is the charges are free activations. I'm picturing stuff with like 3 warrior units popping this, and then popping 3 Valhalla abilities on your 9-pack, your 2 9-packs and your 6-pack. Assuming everything's fresh and they're lined up exactly. 5.5 inches from you. You could really do some damage here. But I guess in practice, how often are you shooting for this or getting it off?
Ragnarok's a lot of fun. So if I roll 2 Sawillos, in fact, my game yesterday against one of my sons, I rolled 2 Sawillos on turn 1. And I was like, I know I'll want this later. So I actually put it on Ragnarok. He plays Norman, so he ended up eating me alive anyway. But he got off later in the game, and I did have a lot of fun with it. But truly, I mean, if you roll it on turn 1, I'm probably not going to keep it, right? And again, like you were mentioning, pointing out to newer players. if you roll one Sewillow, you cannot put a Sewillow on Ragnarok and hope to roll the other one later in the game. You need to roll two in the same turn, and that's not easy, right? Now, if I get it on turn 2, turn 3, I'm probably going to leave it on there and have it ready to go as a threat. Ragnarok totally changes the game once it goes off. There's a lot of things that you kind of don't really have your head wrapped around until you realize, what that free charge means and how it interacts with fatigue and everything. And especially against an opponent who hasn't experienced Ragnarok before, they're probably going to make mistakes with Ragnarok. So say I've got, I'd love to have your ideal situation you outlined where I've got 3 units of warriors lined up, ready to go, loaded up with Valhalla, play Ragnarok, and just go in, right? And that would be glorious. But it never seems to work out that way. More likely, it's I've got Ragnarok on the board and maybe enough dice to activate a few other units, right, to move them into position. And I probably can't back them up with any other Saga abilities because I've got 2 Sewillows on Ragnarok, a few dice to move, whatever. Maybe if I'm lucky, I've got Frigg ready to go because fatigue removal is really great with Ragnarok. So once you play Ragnarok and the charges become free, that means that say I've got that hearthguard unit, I send him in to hit a unit. The opponent has to make a hard decision of how they deal with fatigue. If my hearthguard go in with fatigue, if they remove that fatigue, I'm actually kind of happy about that because they're trying to increase their armor to save themselves, right? That's not the thing to do because say I send my hearthguard in with 2 fatigue because they just ran across the board to get there to get that free charge. If you remove those 2 fatigue and I survive the battle, well, then I'm fresh and ready to charge again. And if I beat you, you moved away S, I just charge you again for free. I get another fatigue. Then you've got to make the hard decision of do you remove that fatigue or not? And then eventually the opponent will realize I better not remove their fatigue. And so they don't. And then, we fight and it turns out, and I probably end up with an exhausted unit, at the end. It's also really interesting how it works with warlord fights. You got 2 warlords next to each other. Yeah. Ragnarok goes off. One warlord charges the other warlord. They fight. Some take fatigue. One retreats. Well, I can charge again for free, and again and again, and you could end up. Yeah. You could end up fighting, 3-4 warlord combats because I'm removing fatigue, he's removing fatigue because we don't want to die. But it just, keeps the swirling melee going. So I really like Ragnarok because, if you have the upper hand already, it's really powerful. If you don't have the upper hand already, it can turn things around. And it really introduces situations where opponents can make mistakes in dealing with it. And so I like that sort of chaotic aspect of it creates. So I think it's a great ability. It's always would be a hard decision if I roll 2 Sewillows not to put them on there. So
okay, cool. Yeah. Some great points there about the multiple. It kind of replaces that ability from the first board where you fight two combats back to back. This is kind of we'll just shunt it into Ragnarok here in a way. So that becomes very cool. Do you ever use the multiple Valhalla aspect to it, or is the charges really the bang for your buck?
Yeah, it's hard to have those dice. I mean, if I roll Ragnarok and ideally, if you're lucky, you've got 1 unit position for it, 1 solid unit, right? Maybe you've got 2. And if that unit has fatigue, well, I'm going to be using dice to rest it. What I really want with Ragnarok is a fresh unit because once they start going, they start accumulating fatigue. So probably more likely than Valhalla, I'm going to use, Frigg or just, use a die to rest. I don't know that in any game I've ever done more than 1 Valhalla with Ragnarok, but someday.
Someday we'll get my dream scenario lined up here.
Yeah.
Cool. So awesome ability. I don't really have anything to add there, but a suitably epic epic ability to close it out here. So we talked about your kind of army type composition generally. Are you, I guess, in Clash of Warlords, setting up terrain and trying to go after the enemy? Do you have a kind of a usual battle line or a plan that you typically stick to? Who's out front versus back, or any ideas there?
Yeah, I mean, I like to deploy. I want my warlord near the hearthguard. Obvious things. I do like deploying some stuff, sort of out on the wings to maybe draw some units off or something like that, right? To kind of maybe split up the enemy a bit. As far as terrain goes, I like thinking about, well, what kind of lanes am I going to have to advance in that'll maybe minimize the amount of shooting I'll take? So, I like woods because they will, block line of sight. They give a nice place if I have Levy if I have Levy archers for them to go in there. Like I said earlier, I'll move berserkers into a wood to kind of lie in wait. But I do like a lot of terrain because it blocks line of sight, and I don't want anybody shooting at me if I can, right?
Yeah.
In general, the more the terrain, the better, unless I'm fighting against somebody who can exploit the terrain, like the Welsh or the Irish, and then I'd be fine if we fought in an open field.
Push back. So, get it out to the edges there.
It varies. It varies. But
do you have trouble with? You mentioned getting stomped by the Normans. Is that a tough matchup for your Vikings? Who do you have trouble with?
Well, in first edition there were a lot of factions that gave him trouble, but some of the old ones that gave like terrible trouble, like I never liked fighting Irish, aren't so bad now. Odin, the ability on the board, Odin has really helped with that, and changes to just the whole board in general have helped with that. Normans are tough. Welsh are tough, especially mounted Welsh. I never get excited about playing them. Like I said, one of my sons plays Normans, and it's always a tough matchup. We know each other, we know what we're going to do well, so it's always a tough fight. Otherwise, I feel pretty good about putting them up against anybody really. But I think right now the Normans are hard for the Vikings to hit. That's the trouble. I mean, you have to get them to play gallop, by planning multiple attacks and make that decision, and then you can send something in. But you're not going to be going in with everything you got because you're using dice to draw the gallop rather than just execute your attack once. So that's problematic. But
sapping your dice resources just to get at them.
But it doesn't feel unfair or anything. I mean, I still like the game. Still a great matchup. Well, you go back to first edition. There were some fights that just felt unfair. So, no, they're a great force now. Vikings. I think they get kind of a reputation as sort of a newbie sort of faction, and in some occasionally in my experience. But I think they can really, really shine. So
yeah, absolutely. What I like about them is with this combination of abilities, essentially any unit that you have can do just a ton of damage if you were to stack them up. So if they take out one of your 5 units, you still have 4 killer units that can exploit all of these abilities. Where compared to like my Romans or something, you have archers or horsemen. Other factions are splitting off into specialties that grant them abilities but limit their attack power. Well, all these guys are on foot. They're all doing their things, but they can all essentially use these abilities to equal effect. And just having 6 warriors at the end of the game can still turn into just an insane number of hits with Allure, Valhalla, Thor. So you can really do damage with any unit left on the board there. So for that reason, I think it is kind of like a great newbie army because you're always still going to be able to come back, tip for tat there. Give as good as you get, versus maybe some other factions that wouldn't be possible. So while I had you, I wanted to jump into the legendary units. Maybe we can touch on those. We've got Harald Hardrada here, King of Norway. So I believe there's a version of him in the last Romans, but this is the Viking one. He's got the cool Varangians compared to those guys. So he's a legendary warlord. He costs a point, but he does generate the extra Saga die. So we're good there. He's armor 5, 6 against shooting, and he has a heavy weapon to boot. So very, very powerful right there, since essentially he's hitting other guys with his +1 and not really suffering the downside himself. He's got bodyguards, determination, presence, pride, resilience, we obey. So I believe that's the standard suite of abilities, but he can have a single unit of Hardrada's hearthguards, which are promoted to Varangian guards, and these guys are just like him, essentially, with the armor loadout. So even though they have the Dane axes, you can they'll be still armor 5 to start with. And then there's 6 against shooting, which in this edition, there isn't actually a lot of stuff like that out the door. So very resilient to shooting, just loaded down with all their goodies from Constantinople. They generate attack dice like regular hearthguards. You're capped at a unit of 8. But these would be, this looks pretty fun to use with Thor, like you mentioned previously. So
yeah, they're great. I mean, because Harald, he gets a +1 to hit, and the Varangian guard get +1 to hit. And so every 5 or 6 they roll on attack counts as 2 hits. So him and that unit of 8 Hearthguard, they're monsters, and they've got great armor. So you send them in with Thor and Allure, they're going to do really, really well.
Yeah,
so
I'll be very, very pleased. Yeah, essentially with that +1 to hit, every attack dice you get is just like a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see myself. I would use these guys at 5 points. I would run it and see how it worked out. Definitely at 8 points, there would be no reason not to go for this fella here.
Sure.
Do you want to chat with us about Mr. Ragnar Lothbrok?
Yeah, Ragnar Lothbrok, the legendary legend himself. So he is a legendary unit. He generates 2 Saga dice. He has armor 5 melee, 5 shooting, aggression 8. And the standard warlord abilities, aside from We Obey, does not have We Obey. It's sort of replaced with something else. And he has resilience 2 through his Son of Odin ability. In his last words, he says, "The days of my life are over. I die laughing." So resilience 2 is pretty awesome. I'll tell you why, in a sec here. But his other ability is the Pillager. So he, at the start of the activation phase, all other units within S of Ragnar receive the Determination special rule. So this is a great way to spur on that fast attack of the Vikings. It's effectively, I don't know how many you could probably get. I mean, if you, given on the scenario, if you can deploy, 3-4 units around him, that's effectively a gain of 3 or 4 dice. Now he does give up We Obey, so that's kind of a loss. So effectively, I think it's a net gain of 2 or 3 Saga dice.
I would say,
right?
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool as far as to get your attack going. I mean, otherwise, it takes a lot of dice to advance a line in Saga, right? I mean, you use your whole turn's dice to just advance a line in Saga. But Ragnar lets you do that pretty easily. So I like that ability. And then the Resilience 2, there's obviously he's exceeds the normal warlord, and could take on any normal warlord. And there's only a few other legendary warlords that have resilience too. And you think about it, well, it's not just really one better, right? Because you can take 3 fatigue before you go down. So effectively, it takes 7 hits to kill him versus 4.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference. I mean, resilience 2 is a big jump.
After rolling the black dice, there has to be seven failed hits.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's deceptively.
I like him too. I've had fun with him. He was fun in the first edition of the game. He was similar in the first edition of the game with the activations and stuff. And I think in the second edition of the game, he's a lot of fun to play and does some cool stuff. And if you can get him in combat, he's really good. He's really good. So yeah, I like him. I'm pleased. The Vikings. Both the legendary units are solid.
Pretty good. So could you see yourself using him at 6 points?
If I had to choose between Harald or Ragnar, I'd probably take Harald at 6 points. But I like Ragnar too. There's some other kind of quirky stuff. There's some quirky stuff I did with Ragnar in first edition with Levy, actually. Levy are hard to activate, right? Because you got to use components. But if you have an ability like this, where you can give your Levy determination, and you could actually field 2 units of Viking bowmen and get them to shoot consistently, and you could have your shooty Viking force.
Oh wow, interesting. Yeah. You could you might still be able to get a little play about that.
Yeah.
Very cool. I wanted to touch on the mercs a little bit.
Sure.
Since we're seeing a lot more of those out there, but not at Adepticon this year. So they can take a fair number here of fellows. I'm not really going to get into it too much, but I did want to mention that on their board, they do have a couple abilities that could tie in pretty well. I think the Njord ability, I believe that would affect them since it affects each unit within medium. So you've got that, and then you have Ragnarok, which would also they could benefit from, like the Shield Maidens. If all the enemies' armor is reduced by 1, they're going to be a little more juicy. And then Valhalla becomes a basic Saga ability, so you could actually use Valhalla like on your Shield Maidens. So I wouldn't have an issue with that. It seems pretty themey. Looking at some of the other ones, the Galgadal could get pretty brutal with that as well. These guys can take the Flemish Mercenaries as well. So they could go to Valhalla as well. So a little something to consider if you are into the mercs. Maybe you could get a little more juice out of them compared to some of the other factions. But after looking at everything, I think those are the only 2 that would really come into play. So potentially some uses there for your Vikings. So overall, I think we're looking at a solid force. So thanks for coming on. Actually, I want to talk with you a little bit more. I probably should have talked about your qualifications at the beginning here, but you will be running an event at Adepticon here, or co-running. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'll be running the Age of Crusades event with Eric. So, looking forward to that.
Yeah, that is.
Haven't picked scenarios yet. Still working on that. So many exciting scenarios to choose from.
Okay.
So, and I'll be playing in the other 3 Saga events. Yeah. Can't wait. I have 2 sons who both play Saga. They'll both be there. They'll be playing all 4 days. So
awesome.
Look out for them. They're the ones to worry about.
The Mahala's bloodline is strong. So they're going to be, I'm assuming, teaming up for the team event on Friday.
That's right.
That left you open. So it's you and me, baby.
Yeah.
I never do too well, but I think with you on my side, I feel like this is it. This is the year we're going in.
The team event's so much fun anyway. I mean, it's just a blast. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We got to talk strategy soon.
Yeah.
So start scheming and planning.
We'll figure it out. We'll come up with some ideas here with these abilities. But it sounded like you wanted to take Vikings for the teams.
I'm flexible, but I'm always happy to play Vikings. I play all the Norse factions, so I've what people ask, what factions you have painted up? Well, I have Norse. I mean, effectively, I have probably like 15 points of Norse models at this point. So they can. I've played Norse Gales, Pagan Rus, Yalm's Vikings. I like them all. I like Anglo Danes. So, yeah, I can pretty much field any of those.
We've got our options. So I'm gonna chat with you and see if I can get some secret info about the team scenarios ahead of time so we can gain advantage. But I'm sure.
Yeah,
it's gonna be a blast anyway. Looking forward to it. Glad that I could do that with you. Yeah. And I'm glad that you could come on today and chat with me about the Vikings. And hopefully you can come on some other time and we'll chat about some other factions, maybe about our games perhaps at Adepticon. Sure. We could do some battle report type things.
Yeah.
If we win, we'll definitely do it. If we lose, maybe I'll just kind of just glance over real quick and a follow-up video. But cool, yeah. Well, thanks for
having me on. I love the show. I watch everyone. So I'm glad you're doing it. Everybody appreciates it. Awesome. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike. And I think that's it for today. We're gonna catch you guys on the next one. See ya. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Saga.